Morning. Today in the small shed we're going to actually start assembling the metal cart that goes underneath the MFT workbench, and that will be coming up next. Well, today it's time to start assembling the bench. We've got all the pieces laid out. There's top and bottom longitudinal rails, the cross rails, the verticals, 3 cross pieces of MDF that stiffen the whole thing up and provide support. The draw runners, supports are all cut, drilled and ready to assemble. Draw runners at the back. And then there's the bits and pieces of casters, nuts and bolts, the caster units that were assembled in a previous episode, and just the torque wrenches and things like that. So the first thing to do is probably to start putting all the little torque screws in the ends of the units so that we can then start and slide them all together. Once the screws are in, it's a relatively simple matter to just slide the rails onto the top and bottom runners, and then there's a hole drilled in the appropriate positions in the centre web of the aluminium section, and the T50 Torx wrench or driver, whatever you're using, will just go through that hole and nip them up. And it all goes together very much like Meccano. It's fairly fast, and as long as it's been cut right, which, assuming you've had somebody else do it, it's going to be bang on, and even the parts that I'd trimmed were all right angles, so it all went together well. Just popping the end caps on at the same time once the things are assembled, because that adds about 5mm onto the length of the rail, so you put the end cap on just to give you a point to line up the cross rail with. Given that this was probably 5 times speed, it gives you a pretty good idea as to how rapidly this actually goes together, and it's incredibly rigid. Once the base is assembled, I started to put the upright position pieces in, starting with the centre one, and then the end pieces go on. Even with the clamping the rails up, it's still relatively quick and easy to alter anything if you're a millimetre or 2 out with lining up things. It's a fairly simple matter just to undo the bolt and move it across to square things up properly, but it all seemed to go together pretty well. Then, having assembled the bottom and sides, it was time to slide the intermediate timber 9mm MDF panels in. These do impart some rigidity to the structure, but actually I think you're probably be fine to use just the aluminium framing for carts. The only reason this was in there was to act as a support for the battens that hold the drawers. I've slightly altered the design for later carts, and because they've got no drawers in them, they will in fact just have the rails. Next was to just check on the height of the remaining bolts and slot the middle rail in, and the end rails. You can see that the middle rail is slightly lower than the others. That's really to enable the worktop that's going on the bench to be able to slot in, and it will be a full-sized panel rather than two individual parts to it. So I had to drop that centre rail down slightly. And I think the only real alteration or adjustment I had in the whole procedure was getting these long top rails on, because by this time you've got about 5 connections coming into the same point, and they needed a little bit of tweaking here and there, but it was still relatively fast and straightforward. Back top rail is then on, which just about completes the carcass, and I would guess it's probably only taken 5 or 10 minutes to put the whole thing together in real time. So then it was down to putting the caster bases onto the bottom. These just rely on the little T-nuts that go into the slotted groove tracks, and there's an M6 bolt. It's M6, I'm not sure, it might be a 10mm, I'm not quite sure what I used, but there's just a small bolt on each of the 3 fixing points, and again it just screws together very quickly. Like a lot of these jobs, if you get the preparation right, doing the actual job itself doesn't really take that long. It's the effort is in getting it right in the first place. And after that it was pretty much a straightforward job just to pop the casters on all 4 corners, and that part of the build was complete. Well, I hope that was useful and that you can see how things are starting to come together now on the rolling cart system. If you like the video, please press like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next video. Bye.